Okay, here we go again. Try one more time. I was having some internet connection issues. Hoping they're resolved. Rebooted the router or whatever the thing is. Just gonna text Frank really quick. Oh, he wants to be a guest. He already knows. Let's see, where's he's quick. This is gonna work now. So we're gonna hopefully cut in where we cut out.
All right.
Frank, again, sorry about that.
Hi, Fraser.
So
Can you hear and see me now?
I can hear and see you. So just about where I got cut off. Let me just see here. So you talked about sort of the ways not to have a good marriage, like jealousy, drunken orgies, and then you went through love and faithfulness, some of the good attributes. Roughly.
You want to start this over again, or you want to start from where we were left off? It's up to you.
Well, I was reading through the sort of the larger, I had it pulled up, I can pull it up right again, the larger Galatians quote that you had posted also, like underneath the other one. So I believe, like you were kind of going through this sort of thing. So, and actually reading. So I think like where I got cut off was about the, say, 24, 25. But
okay, so
if, I don't know what the video looks like, but I'm sure. So
it's really not a lot. Okay, so Galatians 5:24. Those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking, and envying each other. All right, so of course, I love this. You went right to the nitty-gritty. You said you get a little kinky with your wife or something. I thought you get kinky with your girlfriend or something like that with the sex part. So what I say is everything is okay within the context of a marriage. So this is we had somewhat of a debate. I let you do most of the talking. I want to see how your brain was working, where you were going to take it. And I agree with a lot of your points. So explain a little bit what you said about the government and definition of marriage. So
yeah, it was just it went off. It definitely went off into like institution of marriage. So, but to start with, it was just, and I should clarify really off the start rather than go blah. But that definitely, like what you just went through in terms of good and bad sort of relations between a couple. You know, if we just call it that, like the whole, you know, what we were just talking about in Galatians there. That I'm all for. It was just that the hang up I got was on the kind of marriage part. Like, what do you mean by marriage? In the sort of, is that internal spiritual marriage between two people where you just, again, no drunken orgies, just love and faithfulness? Or does it have to be, again, what the government calls marriage that gives you a tax break?
Well,
you know,
whereas,
again, looking at historical context of what they were saying here. So kind of getting to that. When Galatians was written, you know what I mean?
Okay, Fraser, we're going to get into the biblical definition of marriage, which is a union between a man and a woman to start a family. And I brought up some quotes about that, about marriage too. It's what I have. Okay, Genesis 1:27-28. So God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him, male and female. He created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And there's another one from Genesis 2:24. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother, and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So that's my definition of what a marriage is. This is the biblical definition between a man and a woman. Regardless of what the government wants to make it, regardless of what any kind of liberal group wants to redefine it, this is the marriage in the biblical sense. And this is what Paul speaks about as sexual immorality. Sex outside of a marriage, homosexuality, drunken orgies, everything. This is all what Paul is describing.
It was Paul 7. Corinthians, something like this? Was this the one you're referring to? Corinthians 7 or something around this age? I was looking into a couple of things. Yeah, that one that you said earlier, like about just from Genesis, the first one, and that one came up in some discussions too about Adam and Eve being fruitful, and sort of, well, did Adam and Eve get kinky in the Garden of Eden? And it was just like,
No.
this sort of thing, and then it all went off
Yeah, they
on
had it.
Gnostics and whatnot. So I have this kind of brief thing, but then it was talking about Paul in Corinthians 4-7 or 7-11, something around these lines. I looked up Paul 7 there, but anyways, um, no, but I appreciate those examples of the definition, like where to get to, and then again, it doesn't have to be, and I'm sure you appreciate that how, again, the definition of marriage is once again kind of changing, if you will.
It's
Where if
it's been
it
evolving for
was
the last what, at least 10 years, at least that I've seen, and that's the definition alone. And what the government says is a legal marriage is not what the Bible says is
that's
what a
it.
marriage should be. We're trying to
That's it.
redefine terms here. Um,
Hmm.
the redefinition of terms doesn't change what something is. For instance, the sex and gender we used interchangeably for the last 100 years. Now
Hmm.
they're trying to make sex one definition and gender the other, which is it's not right. It's the same
Well,
thing, sex
yeah,
and gender. So
yeah, and that well, like on the marriage part, it got to that point, like again, where I said, one of the big issues with marriage was that it was a religious thing. And they call it just similar kind of thing amongst different religions, but within each one, that controls what marriage is. I've seen one on TV, like a Russian Orthodox
right.
wedding. It's just different, right? Compared to say what you might have in Brooklyn.
Um, okay, well
Or
these are
again,
this is just
what would
traditions
have
that are
happened
different within.
2,000 years ago too. But like even what 2,000 years ago would have been, and again what marriage meant throughout the time. But now, and maybe it was 50 years ago, I don't know exactly when, but where basically the state and the church kind of made the same marriage. We're like, okay, we'll call it the same thing, and once it's together, once you're committed like this, you get a tax break. And then they call it the same thing. But now
Right.
the state is changing its mind about what a union is, so they're just calling everything else marriage. But again, marriage, that was again a mistake again to try and do the religious thing with the state thing together. And it should have
Well,
been two
it's
separate
it's
things,
the
just as you
government.
said, and call this a union if you want to, but this thing is a marriage. So I agree with you on that. But even Catholic marriage from Paul's time, like you said, Paul 7, he's talking to Corinthians, which is like this new startup sect, right? So it's like, how does
Right.
that mean historically when he said that? But I get you on Genesis. Genesis is more the kind of the starting blocks, if you will. But getting to Paul, maybe that might be a little bit more, well, it'd be something to go to, I believe, or go with sort of words on that topic.
Well, if you're talking about different traditions within each church, it's probably minor differences you're talking about: Jewish
Mhm.
marriage, Christian marriage, and the different sects of Christianity. It's all basically the same. That one man, one woman. Each major religion believes that that's what a marriage is. Um, we're not talking. We're not going to even address Islam, but what the government's definition of marriage is now, you can have it's what homosexual marriage between two men, two women. Now, what's next? Polyandry, polyamory, right? Where's it going to stop? And whether people want to marry their animals, it's
Right now, I guess it stopped there, but just to call it something else, like I'm perfectly fine with that. It's just sort of like whatever you want to do,
I'm
but
not fine
just give it
with
another
calling
name. I'm fine
homosexual
with that.
marriage a marriage.
It seems
I'm
to,
not fine with that.
it, that's it. So to call it something else. So it has these legal terms now, and again, when two people are committed in that same kind of loving relationship, but outside of the marriage definition, again, the government has decided that that's okay. Again, they said that.
They wanted legal
You
marriage for
can't have
homosexuals because they
legal.
wanted the same in America. They wanted the same rights as a normal married couple. They wanted, the
Well, like
tax
again, the
breaks. They
tax
wanted,
code. That's it.
right, the
I'm fine
visitation
with it.
rights. Uh,
Yeah,
was it
I'm okay with that.
inheritance rights, everything. They wanted all that. So
Yeah.
they had that with the civil union. They legalized civil unions. I'm fine with that. You want a civil union,
Hmm.
fine. It's not a marriage. But they wanted to change definitions again, call that a marriage. It's not a marriage. It's
It's not a marriage. That's it.
it's not a marriage.
There was an interesting thing came up in Alberta where I'm from, and it came around this debate, and this was a solution. I can't remember if it was fully enacted, but one thing was just talking about dependency, like dependent relationships, rather than even going into marriage, sexual, anything. When you had, and the example came up, and so what it would have been was dependency would have given you certain rights to inheritance, for example. So what you have in some cases, and I remember there was a couple of of old farmers like this. And it was just two brothers. They're basically lifelong bachelors,
Oh, right.
just
Yeah, I
farming
think
together,
I heard
right?
this.
No, no, no. I'm just serious. Like they're not like gay or something. They're just like like spinsters
No,
or
I've heard
something.
this. I've heard this. Yeah.
And they were kind of, you heard what I'm saying? And so at the end, like they're not sexual at all. It's just that when one dies, the other one is like, that was a dependence, right? One was
Right.
kind of maybe earning money on as an accountant while they're kind of running this farm, and now the accountant dies, and so to have some sort of inheritance rights, and then it just covers everything. It's just this umbrella about like, okay, yeah, we kind of understand this household is going to fall to pieces unless we have some inheritance rights. So in that sense, again, you don't have to call it marriage. Those two old guys certainly wouldn't.
But
Like
they're
that.
using,
I'd say
but they were
the whole
using the
concept.
laws to their
That's
advantage.
it.
They weren't actually married. They were using the laws.
No, but
Um,
these old guys, like again, like it's perfectly fine. They decide not to get married. It doesn't mean they should be, effed at the tax time at their end of their life, right?
that's
Whereas
what the
if you're
government
married, all
gets
of a sudden
into.
you saved 50%. Exactly. Don't get the government into the marriage
Every time,
part.
yeah, right.
Just
It's
into
just,
the, yeah.
especially I don't know how it is in Canada, but in America, homosexual marriage is legal throughout all 50 states right now.
Yeah,
Much
it's
to
here
my
too.
chagrin. Okay, to Canada too? Yeah, because Canada's more
Yeah.
progressive than America is. Um,
But
red
we like
liberal,
it's a lot, yeah. Hmm.
yeah. So you guys don't even have a death penalty. Uh,
No, no, no.
right. So these people, oh wait, what was I going with this? The people using the law, as you said, with the brothers in order to get tax breaks or that's not a marriage. That's basically a sham. They're
Exactly.
defrauding the government in order to get some kind of rights. Um,
But like
so it's
heterosexual
bad.
couples do that too, right? Using heterosexual
Yeah,
marriage
well,
to
yeah,
get like
it's
people into
true.
to get tax break, just to get tax breaks. It's like they've been
Well,
living together for 30 years, but it's like, hey, we should get married and then we'll get this thing. It's like that's
in
essentially
America
the same
too,
thing. You're only doing it
older
for
couples,
that, not even to, yeah.
in America too, Fraser, older couples need to get divorced in order to get any kind of a medical coverage. Because if you make like one penny over, you lose your threshold for Medicaid. So they get a divorce on paper. They still live in the same
Oh my
house.
God.
It's a government
Yeah.
divorce, but not a divorce in the church. So they take
Do
advantage
you
of
know
the
what I'm
tax rules.
saying? That's what I'm saying about the government, the state institution of marriage. It's just like, okay, you lose control over it if again you have that cultural desire to have, again, this is what we call institution. Again, you go to Russia, and this is what we call marriage. They just don't just leave that alone. Create something else. Like again, I'm fine with people. I'm just about freedom of expression. So you know what, live and let live. So in these
I
things, it's just
understand
sort
where
of
you're
like
going.
as long as nothing's bothering me, and as long as no one's hurting anyone, then again, that's fine with me. Again, it seems to be a sticking point about the naming of it. And again, we're talking about those words, and it's all important, and an interpretation of words. So for me, I say marriage, I say union. For me, that's okay. But when you're talking about like a Christian marriage, just that Christian part, that means a lot different than, again, if you call it a gay marriage or, that just, it's a different thing. There are two different categories once you put that, what do you call it? A describer word in front of it or whatever. It is a word. Anyways, you know what I mean? So then they just become two
Right.
different categories. One is a religious, spiritual thing, and one is, I'm sure one would call it like a spiritual bond. We could, anyway, one could debate that, but I'm sure they would call it that, the same spiritual bond. But at least it's a legal one too, but in two different camps. Because again, as
Well,
I completely understand, for
again,
you that spiritual bond is not the same. For me, the spiritual bond is the same, but again, I
well,
just
I
live and
don't
let
think the
live. That's my
spiritual. It's not the same thing with the homosexual relationship. It's not the same spiritual bond. It's when you hear the word, see the word, they become one. The word is Echad, E-C-H-A-D, which means the two become one. God's been
hmm
described as Echad. That's a Hebrew word. The opposite word is Yahid, which means just one numerical being. Like God would be considered Yahid, but that's not. Anyway, uh, when Moses described God, um, he described God as Echad, more combined, united as one. But they knew about God being more than one being. They knew about the Father and the Holy Spirit, not necessarily about the Son. So describing that as a marriage, two becoming one, You can't do that with the homosexual relationship. It's not. It's not what's described as biblical in terms of a spiritual or a physical relationship. Um, Ichad describing a marriage is between a man and a woman and alone. Um, Even because in a homosexual relationship, you can't produce children naturally. It's not just not possible. Um,
But that I believe.
and if we're going to talk about older people being infertile or people who don't want to have kids, um, that's the bond is still there. The spiritual, physical bond is still there under God, being a holy bond between two people. You can't have that with
Mhm.
homosexual, and you can't have that being polygamous or anything like that. It's it's a marriage, and there's there's prophets out there in the Bible that were polygamous too. Not necessarily sanctioned under God. Solomon had a problem with his wives. His actually wives actually took him away from God and made him become an idolater for a long time. He had 300 wives and 700 concubines. Yeah, right. You read the Bible, yeah. Some of these people were like way out there. I mean, you want one or two wives, All right, maybe that's within the realm of possibility, but 700?
Wait, 300?
Yes,
700
300 wives,
concubines? That's like his ladies on the side of 300
yes,
wives? It's like a
yes,
thousand?
yes. So you can
Oh
sleep with three
my
different
goodness.
women a day, and have a different woman for every day of the year.
Just thinking
That's
about
not.
that one biblical story will give me very many impure thoughts. I'm sorry, but you
Yeah,
just
I
like,
know. No, I know.
I
Yeah.
just, how could, I'm just trying to do the
No,
calculations. And again, every
just
time I do
think
the
about that.
calculations, I come down to one woman every tick, tick,
But
tock, tick, tick, tick,
if we're
tick.
thinking about that, the concubines weren't part of the marriage. 300 wives.
Oh
How
man,
could you become bonded with 300 people? You
that's
can't.
whack.
It's impossible. And
But it's just,
even the
but just
Bible
that that
says,
was sanctioned at one time, and now it's not. So it's just that sort of change in what marriage is allows me to hold with the strong belief that that bond is what's necessary. And I don't quite understand. Perhaps you can clarify why you say it. You can't have that loving bond in a gay marriage. I don't understand
no,
why
you
that
can't.
follows from the God and the Holy Spirit connection means that
No, I'm just
two
saying.
guys
No,
can
no,
love
no.
each
Okay.
other, and two
No, I'm
women
just
can love
using
each
the
other.
word ikad to describe a bond between two people.
Okay.
I went a little off track there too. So, but the ikad
No, but
word
why is it not possible to you? I just want to understand that. It's totally possible to me. I just want to understand why it's not possible
it's
to
it
you. Oh, which
because
I'm far away. So.
because within a marriage defined as biblical, you can't have two people making a child. And even if they wanted to adopt a child, you have one child with two male parents and two female parents. Doesn't a child deserve an opposite sex parent? It's like it's
But
on the
doesn't
borderline of child
wouldn't that,
abuse, I
yeah.
think. But
Okay, why
we
don't
talk
can I
about.
just give a counter example? Yeah,
Go ahead.
just a counter example. Like what about you get now we have all this scientific knowledge. So we can have a couple where Mr. or Mrs. or both are infertile. You know right off the bat, sorry, you had this infection when you were young. The kid just won't work. So how is that different than, again, knowing going in with a girl-girl relationship that you just can't have kids together? So how are those two situations, again, based on just that one principle you're laying down, how are those different? Like
Because
you can't have kids together.
even
This
if
relationship is
they're
futile,
infertile, even if they're
Mm.
infertile, they can't have kids. The 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 potential is still there. There's
No, but for sure,
yeah,
like the whole
no,
kid had to be removed. You don't even have something, or I don't know what it is. I don't know.
but
Or,
even but it's
I don't know.
same sex. Okay. Oh God, I keep
I'm
getting
trying to
my
think of
thoughts
an
straight right
extreme
now.
example, but where it's a man and a woman, but with absolutely no hope of kids. You know what I mean? So I'm trying to just think if an example that, whatever, I'm trying to think of one, but just imagine in your mind where a man and a woman, but we know for sure and certain those two just can't have kids together, but they love each other for all time. Is that is that much different than the two girls getting together? Like, or how is
It is
it
different
different in your mind? How is it different? Yeah.
because the two women can't procreate, two men can't procreate. And even if they're a man and a woman who are infertile can't procreate, but
It cut out.
their
Oh
love is still
no.
sanctioned under God. And you
You're
read
cutting out
anything
a
in the
bit.
Bible. What, you losing me?
Yeah. But go ahead.
Okay. So you,
Little
if you
bit,
look
a
at,
little bit. But no, I was trying to think of a man-woman example where again,
yeah, I
there's
know,
no
no, I know.
possibility of procreation. Yeah. Okay. Maybe you were responding
No,
to
I
that. Please
understand.
just repeat the last thing. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Okay.
I
Gotcha.
understand. But
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
read the story of Abraham and Sarah. Abraham and Sarah couldn't have kids, and God promised them a child.
Yeah.
And they were well into their 90s and hundreds when God promised them this.
Oh my.
In fact, Abraham laughed.
These stories are so
So,
weird. I got to
but
tell you.
their
Anyways,
marriage
they're
was
into their
sanctioned under
hundreds
God
and
and
they
was
want to have a
blessed.
kid. Okay. So they get a kid. Hold
Well, I lost you a little bit. What did you
on.
say?
Oh, I just said that there were 100. That it was like they're 100 and they wanted a kid. Okay.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
They didn't. Well, they were married. They resigned themselves to that they weren't going to have kids, and God said to them, "You're going to have
Hmm.
a child." Um. So what did well? So what did Sarah do? Sarah laughed. She didn't believe God, so she gave her handmaiden Hagar to Abraham, and she had a child with him. That was Ishmael.
Okay.
And a
Oh,
few months later,
oh,
right? Yeah, a couple of years later, Sarah
he was allowed to
bore
have
a
her
child,
on the
Isaac.
side
So, and they were well into their
with
hundreds
the
too
girl on
when
the side.
Abraham had Isaac. Huh? Wow.
So, no, but it wasn't his wife.
No,
No,
Hagar
maybe I
was
missed
not
that part.
Abraham's wife. Hagar was Abraham's mistress, basically, you would say. But that union wasn't
Concubine or
sanctified under God.
mistress? Yeah.
Yeah, so. And you don't, well, you still,
Okay.
Ishmael was sent away. Isaac was the
Did I
one
lose you?
that God
No, I
God's
think you
covenant.
did. Yeah.
But,
Okay. Okay.
but even that
No,
marriage, they
that's
weren't
okay. No,
infertile.
that's fine. I have one other thing. Oh, oh, cut out. Hello?
Am I still here? I still see you. And that will cut. Fraser, you still there? Fraser?
Mm-hmm.
Hello?
Okay. No, that's fine. Okay. No, that responds. No, that responds to it again from exactly what I was looking for. Is like again that those passages that I don't. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, good. Okay. No,
Can
because
you hear me?
yeah,
I
I can
can
hear
hear
you
you.
fine. I can hear
Ah,
you
do you
fine.
not hear me now?
I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you.
You can. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that answers my question. I have one more thing, and it came up again in the discussion about in Quebec specifically. So Quebec was, being French, it was Catholic for a long time. And then the church kind of came into power and really was abusing power. Like politically, we're kind of keeping the people sort of as a working class, sort of, and some feel, again, I'm doing a very bad historical overview, but kind of sold Quebec to the Anglos, basically, And also we're doing very, like, really, really intrusive policies in terms of marriage and family, where, you kind of get a knock on the door at a certain time and says, well, now it's your time to have a baby. Like that kind of level of
Oh,
control
that's really
of
intrusive. No.
marriage, right? And so that's why it comes to today, where we get a very low level of Catholic, just religious marriages. Like most people just get civil unions, just because of that cultural rejection. So again, when it comes to what marriage is, for me, not that it's important, but it is, I believe that it's more about, again, what you're doing. So that, again, as you said, it's not and you corrected me, and rightly so, it's the people that abuse, not the church is not the thing that's evil, that some evil people abuse the church
Exactly. It's right.
and
That's
that
right.
position of
That's where
power
he went with
to
that. Right.
corrupt the thing, to corrupt what a beautiful union is. Like you don't come in and basically say, okay, you get on top of her and make a baby. That's not right. That's not a beautiful union
No.
in my mind. So it was about that. So when we talk about marriage, that's why I wanted to put quotes around it, because that institutional marriage, especially here, has kind of a cultural burn to it. So again, that's why. But I agree. Like when you started off, and it was just great, the Galatians one about again drunken orgies versus love and faithfulness. I don't have it in front of me, but basically just that.
Yeah.
And if
Right.
we can define marriage as that, and again, if for you it's just between a man and a woman, again, that's fine. I just again you justified it very reasonably, right?
Well,
For me, it's not
okay.
that, but
For
again, I believe that any of these relationships start on that, then you don't get into this one person with 100 concubines, right? That's, for me, that is not going to fall into these categories. That's going to fall into jealousy, drunken orgies. That's going to fall into all of those things in list number one, right? So I think followed faithfully to these things, it'll naturally go to a one-on-one relationship. And for me, that can take many forms. But again, starting with that base of where exactly what you put up, it was like, don't just read the little quote, read the bigger part. And as soon as you did that, I'm like, perfect. I'm with that all the way. After that, there's again some details on gender and sex or whatever that is. But once you start there, I like, again, I think we're like 95% in agreement, honestly.
Let's see. Can you still hear me?
I hope you heard me.
I heard you. Can you hear me?
No.
No, you can't hear me?
I can hear you. I hope you heard
me.
You can hear
me. Okay, good. Okay. Okay. We were talking about homosexuality before, and I don't know if you've read about verses on homosexuality in the Bible. So
some of the stuff
I want to read a few.
Yeah.
I want to wait.
Yeah.
Okay, this is not the one I wanted. There's a Bible verse on homosexuality that I want to read.
But is it from the New Testament or the Old Testament?
Absolutely. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry, I'm all over the place here right now. I don't usually do this.
No.
Okay, wait. Is there a Bible verse on homosexuality I want to read out, and it's not working? I know Leviticus. Okay, here we go. Leviticus 18:22. You should not lie with the male.
Oh, yeah, I think I still hear you.
An abomination.
Okay, but
that's
in like
Leviticus 20:13. If a man lies with the male as with the woman, both of them committed abomination. They surely should be put to death. Their blood is upon them. Okay. 1 Corinthians.
But that's
6,
we're going to go into some really old stuff for that, no?
Well, you got it in the New Testament too. If you want to read the New Testament, it's not just in the Old. I think Corinthians is New Testament.
That's it.
Corinthians,
and so I had some but some good part. I think I found one from Corinthians that applies, and it not taken out of context, but I believe that it sort of
well, if you want
lets off a little bit of pressure of the old rules, like even in that context. Is that Corinthians? I think I'm talking. Yeah, Corinthians 7. That's what I looked up, and so just that it was to a people, a letter to a people telling them about who were asking, like, what can we do? It says, like, what can we eat sacrificed animals? Can we sort of, what should we do for marriage? In this new world of new Christians. So then Paul speaking to them. So Paul speaking to them then kind of says, as I read it, it's sort of like you don't have to necessarily go by all the old rules. Don't let your bodily passions lead you to a bad way when you could just release it and kind of lead a good life. So like again, there's a fairly long quote, but again, just for one say, like again, we'll just talk about men and women. So I'll just read. So Corinthians 7, we're at 8 here. So now to the unmarried and the widows, I say, it is not good for them to stay unmarried it is good for them to stay unmarried as I do. But if they cannot control themselves, they should marry, for this is better to marry than to burn with passion. So that's 8 and 9, right? That just
right,
to
so
say
basically,
that,
if you can stay single, stay single.
Again, is marry in quote. So it's again how you define marriage in that sense. So in my definition of marriage, that works very well. It's just like don't let it overload so that they're blue to the point of exploding. Your eye's going to blow up. Find something that in my mind that I can hold as a marriage in all the definitions that we talked about of Galatians, and which I believe line up with my own. I mean, not that I follow all the words of the Bible, but just that all those things line up exactly with what I believe. And I don't have to go to all the old ones. Like again, I believe that Paul was kind of saying, all those old rules about Jewish marriage, don't necessarily apply now, kind of thing.
No, they actually do. He's not taking down marriage or redefining it. He's just telling you that
Mm,
a sexual immorality outside of a marriage, homosexual sex, drunken orgies, you know,
mm,
what's it called? When you promiscuity, all these things
okay.
are not sanctioned under God. They're not what you should practice. You should practice sex inside a marriage. That's the
Mm,
one thing the Bible has from beginning to end. You do this within
mm,
inside a marriage, and Paul reiterates that, and it's reiterated throughout the New Testament, mostly
mm.
through Paul's writings, not necessarily through Jesus, but Jesus actually confirms um, a marriage between a man and a woman. This is Mark 10:6-9. From the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife. He's actually quoting Genesis on this. And the two shall become one flesh, so they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. So, reading those words, Jesus is confirming marriage between a man and a woman, nothing else. Anything else is immoral and should not be practiced.
Okay,
Um,
but I don't believe in that. Like, I don't still don't read it. Okay, again, we don't have to go back to homosexuality if you don't want to, but it just, I still don't read in there the kind of, who said it? Is one of you Americans said, if you if you like it, put a ring on it. No, how does it go? Anyways, I don't read
Beyonce,
the Beyonce song, like it. If you
Beyonce,
like,
yeah. If you like it, then you should
anyways,
have put a
so
ring on it.
that's the one. You should have put a ring on it. That there is nowhere in there that I read that you have to put a ring on it so to call it a marriage. I guess maybe we can go at it that way. That historically it was sort of like get to that point that you're with one person, committed for life, and but I don't like again under God, but that doesn't in my mind necessarily mean you have to go into the house of God to be under God. So all of those words, it still doesn't reassure me that Beyonce was right. Do I really have to put a ring on it?
Yes, you absolutely
but
do.
I,
I believe you do.
but you have to be
Uh,
totally committed. But didn't she get married with some guy that ended up cheating on her or something?
I don't follow that
No. Well,
crap.
I
I
might
don't give
think
a
of a
shit.
different one.
I
But
really
you
don't
know what I
care.
mean? No, but
Hollywood
you know
is
what
the
I mean?
highest
Like, what
divorce
does
rate of
the
anything I've ever seen in my life.
exactly? So what does a ring mean? So a ring means nothing. So it has to be deeper than that.
A
That's what I
ring
mean. So
is
when marriage, if a marriage only means a ring, it's like, oh, they got a ring. Okay, they can get freaky,
a ring
kinky, or
is not
whatever.
what a marriage means. A ring is a
No, exactly.
representation of that you're going to devote your entire life to that one person. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's not a commitment. Oh, we can do this for a couple of years, then we're going to get divorced. That's not what it means.
Mm-hmm.
It should be under God in the church, and I could be in a committed relationship with someone all my life, not get married to them. It still wouldn't be sanctioned under God. It would be sinning. You, um, were Adam and Eve married? Absolutely. God created Eve for Adam so he could have children. He wanted Adam to have a companion. Where the word said that you
Whoa,
man and
whoa,
wife, I
whoa, whoa.
don't
How
know.
did
I
they get
don't know.
married? How
But
did those two get
but
married?
like you said,
Wait,
I
wait, wait,
quoted
wait. Back
Genesis
up a
on
bit.
this.
Back up a bit. But how did they get
I quoted
married? In
Genesis on
what
that.
church? No, but in what church? In what? Like I'm just talking about. Does it have to be in a building?
There
And
was
they were
no
obviously
okay
then.
when Adam and Eve were created, there was no religion, there was no man-made laws. So
Yeah,
God created
yeah.
them. God created them to be
That,
together. So He's obviously God sanctioned it. He
yep.
wanted it. Otherwise,
Yep.
it wouldn't have been.
Yes, I totally agree. But just that the context matters totally. And again, like my mother is the type that if I don't walk, well, no, not totally, but if I don't walk into a church, then then it means something different. But for me, it's like, well, Adam and Eve didn't walk into a church. So the context dependent means to me that, again, that spiritual connection doesn't have to be through a church. I just think that follows that it has to be context dependent, but it always has to be based on those principles of just that again that strong deeper connection than what you just see on the surface. Oh, they got matching rings. That must mean they love each other forever. No, 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 no. That's not what that means. It means nothing. In fact, that's just a surface. It's jewelry. That's like the definition. It's meaningless. It's just frivolous. That's the whole meaning of jewelry. So it has to go deeper. And so to go deeper, you don't have to go through a building. It sure helps, though. It sure helps a lot of people just to shout it in
You're
front of
not going
all
to
their
a
friends and
building.
family, and
When you
that's
go,
great.
when
But it
Fraser,
doesn't
when you get
have to be
married under
like that.
God, Fraser, when you get married under God, a
Yeah.
priest is representative of God, sanctifying that marriage. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot more than you put a ring on it. You have a committed relationship. You're faithful to each other. You love each other. You have a spiritual connection. That's all well and good, but without that sanctification under God, it's sinful. This is not my rules. These are the rules from the Bible. I'm not trying
I
to
know,
be,
but
too preachy here,
okay,
but you're
that's
trying to,
fine. But I
well,
have
you're
to no.
trying to
Let
build,
me respond, please.
well, you're
Yeah.
trying to
No, let
take
me respond to that
a
point. Okay, I'll come
monogamous
back.
relationship outside of a marriage and saying that's okay, which the Bible clearly says it's not.
Okay, I'm going to come back though to exactly the point of what if the church, because of its leaders, starts abusing the population and in fact
All right,
promoting
that's that one
poor
person. That
marriages,
person
and
was corrupted.
then no, that was the entire state of Quebec. I'm sorry, but that was an entire state.
All
So it's
right, so the entire
when
state
that
of
happened.
that one, you're taking a few people and they're
No,
corrupting the word of
look it
God.
up. The Quiet Revolution. The reasons for the Quiet Revolution. I'm not making this stuff up. This was a
I know you're not
culture
making this
of the
stuff up,
Catholic Church,
but there's been,
abusing the people, and therefore the people effectively rejecting the church's authority over them because those sanctifications weren't
but
real. They
Fraser,
just
you're
weren't real.
taking
Those
one
were done by
example
people
of a
that were
corruption.
not following. Yes, and so under those cases, a generation of Quebecois can't be expected, in my mind, under a fair God, to be sanctified by corrupt people, because those are the only priests around are the ones that were corrupting their lives. So
I'm sure they
who's
can
going to
find other
sanctify
churches.
it? Who's going to sanctify it in that case?
You can
Like,
find
and
another
so
church. I'm sure. Is there only one church in Quebec?
it was a
I'm not trying to
state.
be.
The church was the
No,
state. The state was the church. Like I'm not making this stuff up. It was like the
no, I know you're not
entire
making
thing.
it
It was
up.
the whole
But
population. It was like a
that's not
million
what's happening
people
in the
of all
United
the
States.
churches.
But
But
Fraser, you're
that's what it
talking
was.
about
And so in that situation,
one province in Canada compared to the rest
no,
of the
but let me
world.
no. And it was a certain period in time. But I'm just saying that shows me. That's why I believe that marriage, the definition of it is context dependent. So the generation, or imagine yourself, just imagine a situation where it's a small town. Your whole family, everyone is there. And there's a church with a corrupt priest. And in this town, the priest has control of, say, the sheriff. So, no one can really do anything. That guy's the only guy with a gun. So, under this situation with a corrupt priest that's saying he's sanctifying things, but obviously isn't, the people that want to go about their good, say, just a good Christian life, want to be the need to be sanctified. And for me, that shows that obviously a fair God would allow that to be sanctified under him, but not in front of that corrupt person that's trying to corrupt through devilish ways the people. So in that situation, we just got a small town. The next town is 300 miles that way and that way. We're in Canada, so it's minus 40. I'm just trying to give an extreme example to you, so to say
Yeah,
that
well,
isn't
and
it
I'm going to explain it.
reasonable? Is there one?
Even if
It could not be. Yeah.
Fraser, even if the priest was corrupted in other ways that he he bought the sheriff, he runs the politics or whatever. Um,
Mm-hmm.
if that priest is still, uh, if he's still religious, if he still believes in God, he can still sanctify a marriage outside of the corrupt things that he's done. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it should be done, but you're talking about one province in Quebec that was run by corrupt leaders. It's not what the whole
How about we
church
talk
is.
about
It's not
Boston
what the
then?
rest
Why
of the
don't we
world
talk about
does.
Boston Catholic Church then?
You want to talk about what?
Boston and the Catholic Church.
Boston, the Catholic Church. I'm not sure what you want to. I'm not sure what you want to
There's
talk
like a
about.
real big problem with pedophiles basically coming into the Catholic Church and using it as a way to,
Again,
again,
a
evil
few
people
a
using.
few corrupt
So,
people infiltrating the
mm,
church does not represent what the church means. You
I
have
didn't say that. What I said is, what if that's your priest?
if my priest was a pedophile or something, he should be prosecuted. That's not what a priest should be doing.
You're
But
trying to dance around my question. So, what if that pedophile was the priest in the village that I'm talking about, the only priest?
the
I
only
don't
priest,
think that he
you
is a
have a big
godly
problem
person.
right now. That's a big problem.
Um,
That's a huge problem.
It's a
You know,
problem,
the
right?
diocese
And
should
so what
be
I'm trying to do is to
informed.
get to an extreme example. No, no, please. I'm trying to get an extreme example for where you can see that there would be a way that a fair God would allow marriages to be sanctified away from that freaking arsehole evil person. Just because he's wearing the frock, I believe that God, a fair God, would allow people to go through their lives, have families, without being in sin and going to hell. Because him and then his son was the next priest, so that's 2 generations. I believe that a fair God would allow these people to have kids. That's just my belief, and I believe that I don't wonder why you're not answering directly that question. So please, in this extreme village, it's so
Yeah,
remote
that's.
that what do you do? Your priest is a pedophile now. I'm just trying to go as extreme as I can. What do I do then if
You have.
for you?
Well, it's a
Would you
problem.
allow people to have marriage outside of the church?
Would I? No, no, no.
Not would you allow? Not
There
would
is
you
no
allow? Sorry.
exception to these
What would
rules.
you
There,
believe? Do you believe then that everyone for those 2 generations that had kids in that village is going to a worse place,
you know,
going to hell? Do you
probably. I
believe?
don't
I'm
know.
just please
You
a
know,
yes no, a yes
you.
no.
Well, Fraser, you're going into a gray area. I can't really
No,
answer.
I'm not. I'm just saying yes no. It's black white. Is it too gray? Because it seems like if you allow
It's
for
an
that,
extreme
then we can at
example. I don't
least
know. You know,
expand
it,
just so we can expand the definition of what it is to be sanctified under God. So for me, and again, we've had the issue, we come to this sticking point again where for me, that priest, I can't trust that priest enough because of those assholes that come in. Because they know that that's a position of power and that evil people will seek that out to abuse weak people. And for me, that's too much of a risk right now. Whereas I totally believe, and I feel it, like what we would call maybe the Holy Spirit telling me that, look, this is good. We're sanctifying this thing without the church, the whole thing, not just the marriage thing, but that as long as I follow these basic principles, that again, values that we've agreed upon all the way along, other than the gay thing, but like all these things about love, commitment, even monogamy and all these things, we're right online. But it's just like, I believe there's a way to sanctify it outside of the church. So I just throw this really weird extreme example. I think I just did what Sean did to me, but so it's just so weird. I don't know how you're like,
yeah,
answer
right.
it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about pedophiles. It's like, oh, I just did what Sean did. Sorry.
Hey,
Sorry,
Fraser,
I'm sorry.
find.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that.
No, it's all right.
That's
Hey,
it.
Fraser, find a
But
rabbi.
yeah, find a rabbi.
Yeah, find a rabbi. Get married to the
It's
rabbi.
like,
Uh, See, now, the
no,
one
but
priest in
yeah,
the village. I don't know.
it's,
Hundreds of
it's
years
a dumb
ago, I would
example,
say that would be a big problem. Today,
right?
with our technology, and that we can travel, cars, planes, trains. I don't think that could be a problem. You can always find a priest that's not corrupted. Um,
Mhm.
we know that the Catholic Church has had pedophiles, and they've been shifted around. In fact, one of the bishops was actually involved in this too. He's shuffling priests around that were pedophiles, not bringing the law into it, but doing it within the church. They weren't being punished, they
Mhm.
weren't being excommunicated, but they were just being shuffled around. Um,
Yeah.
of course, that's wrong. That shouldn't be done. But that's a few people who's corrupted
Mhm.
inside the church, God's church. God's church is perfect. People can become corrupted. Just remember that. So, having
Yeah.
said that, the one
Well, and
priest in
not
the
even
one
becoming that.
village,
He's like,
if that
yeah,
priest,
sorry.
wait, no, okay,
Yeah.
if that
Yeah.
priest is corrupted in other areas of his life, whether it be he's buying politicians, he's sexually immoral himself, but he
Mm-hmm.
has the belief in God, and God gives him the power to sanctify a marriage. You should be able to go to that priest and say, I want to get married, and that marriage would be blessed. Regardless of what that priest has done, in that moment, if he believes in God and can sanctify a marriage, and he has the power to do so, go to that priest and get married. Otherwise, what are you going to do? You're going to take a chance, live in sin, and have bigger consequences to your soul? Is it worth it? I don't know. I don't think so. You got to,
Mm.
it's,
Okay.
you know, not everybody can be perfect. We're all going to be sinning. Whether, and God sees sin as equal, whether you're doing something little or something big. Every sin is equal in God's eyes.
Okay. Can I
Um,
extend it on then? So this priest, he's evil as he is, people are still going to get married, and then he dies, but no one took it up. or there was like a congregation. Anyways, the church leaders in that little village in the Antarctic. I don't know, whatever. They died
Yeah.
now.
Little House on the
So
Prairie made me think of.
are all the fallen? Yeah, again, I try and create this thing on an island that was, say once the plane stopped flying and whatnot. Say, um, like again, the priest dies. Then are all future generations going to hell? Do you think? Kind of thing.
Absolutely
Like it's
not.
just like,
I'm sure
what?
that as big as the church is, they'd always move priests around. Uh,
No, no, no. I'm just
it's
saying,
you
say
know
it's
it's
like the last village on earth or something. No, I don't know how to say
natural.
it. I'm trying to say an extreme example where, say, they just can't get a priest there, and they can't even contact people to say, say it was a plane went down, no one knew it went down. They had one priest with them, so they created a little village in the Amazon. And, I'm trying to create an example where there's just no contact, and then that one person that can sanctify gets a snake bite. And now, but again, for me, there must be another method to sanctification because a fair God wouldn't let those people just say, dang, we can't
Well,
we loved each
ma-
other. Now we can't even do things fun, without going to hell. It would just be, a fair God wouldn't do that, I don't think. And so that's
oh,
why
God.
I have trouble with this human sanctification. It's like, no, no, no. God will do the sanctifying for me, thank you very much. Why do
All
I
right, I do
need
have I have a
a guy in a
solution,
cross to
Fraser.
do it?
I do
Yeah,
have a solution. Uh,
yeah.
you can study the Bible, pray, or you can go online and become a minister, and they can sanctify a marriage. I'm sure that would be okay, as long as it's done the right way under God. I'm sure that's okay.
Hmm.
It's
I
it's
still
a
have that thing. Like,
you're
it's
bringing up a
again,
very
why?
very extreme example.
But it gets to, I guess I should break it just way back. It just way, way, way back to like my own life. Like, I just still don't think I need someone else to sanctify for me. It's like, no, I've got God to do that for me. And so, sort of like, how, yeah, it's just like, how, God didn't tell me to let you do that, to tell me to do that kind of thing. God just, I think God just sanctifies things. So God's sanctifying things in the way that sort of Paul was describing to the Corinthians, to saying that, like, guys, live like this. We haven't got the full Bible written yet, but live like this and you'll get into heaven. And it's sort of like you can still you can still marry a Jew. That's okay. And so we're going to let kind of you off not off the hook, but we're going to let things slide a little bit, as it were. Like you don't have to marry just amongst your own kind of thing, as long as everyone's living
Well,
godly. And so it was sort of that kind of message. Like again, when Paul says that to the Corinthians, again, the whole Bible isn't written yet. And so all they're going on is maybe the old stuff, but they're sort of like, well, are we allowed to do this new stuff now? And then Paul says, look,
well,
you're allowed to do some of that new
Paul.
stuff,
No,
but
wait,
keep it
Fraser, hold on,
keep it on the
hold
down
on,
low kind of thing.
Fraser. Paul did not teach anything different from the Old and the New Testament. You got to remember about Paul. He was studying to be a Pharisee. He was very educated about the Old Testament and everything Roman. He was educated in Gentile and Jewish education. He was a very educated man. Um,
Hmm.
and he met Jesus on the way to Damascus. He was a Christian persecutor. So everything that Paul taught was taught before. He just reworded it. He didn't teach anything new. He didn't change anything. He just he was just the most influential person that could possibly he wrote 1/3 of the New Testament. Um, but when he taught everything that Jesus taught.
I
He
guess
taught
my point on that was just that,
nothing was new that
you
Paul
know,
said. So if you're going to go to old teachings versus new teachings, you're making a mistake over there because nothing is new or old in the Bible. Everything is relevant. Um, we can go to
well,
ceremonial
do
law
you eat
stuff.
like shellfish? Do you eat seafood on Fridays? Like, there's
That's
all
for
these
the
rules that
okay.
we
You're
kind of
talking about
adapt over
okay.
time.
You're talking about ceremonial laws and laws
The
that were
whole
meant for
thing
the
about,
Israelites, not for the Gentiles.
well,
Those laws were for the Israelites, not the
we're talking about
Gentiles.
marriage. Yeah, I'm talking about ceremonial laws.
Marriages, no, okay. Religious laws are separate from ceremonial laws. Ceremonial laws were for the Israelites. Religious laws are for everyone.
Hmm.
This is how everyone should live. Shellfish being unclean,
Hmm.
You read Acts chapter 10. All food was made clean. Read what Peter's vision. Um, those laws were for the Israelites. So they had ceremonial laws. They had religious laws. Um,
Hmm.
so Paul didn't teach anything new. I don't know where you get
But
these
I
things that
still
the
like
new teachings are old
no, no,
teachings.
but I just no, no, but it's just but no, no. What I really liked about hermeneutics and getting into that was one point. It's just like you really have to look at it in historical context. So looking at
That's
even
correct.
when Paul was talking to people, these were new Christian communities. But again, before say the New International Version was printed, and that we could all, in if we needed to, read up on it and say, okay, we know what it's all about, and go and practice it. Whereas this is at a time when sort of like the Wild West of the new world. Like it's again we're changing things. You and I are now defining what religious and traditional
But
ceremonial laws are. But again, at the time, it wasn't like defined as clearly as that. So I'm just saying, in
oh,
context,
actually,
how
no,
we
no.
interpret
Everything
that
was defined
would be
very
different than
clearly back
receiving a
then.
letter
But the
from
thing is,
Paul,
no,
right?
the
It's
Paul
like,
was who Paul was preaching to. Paul was preaching
did you
mainly
cut out? Oh shoot! Did you cut
Gentiles
out again,
and Jews.
or did I cut out?
I can see you. I can hear you.
Oh no, you're there. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Paul was teaching
Um.
mainly to Gentiles and to some Jews, but he was bringing a lot of pagans into the world of Christianity. And obviously, pagans were
Mhm.
practicing homosexuality, sex outside marriage, drinking, orgies, all that kind of stuff. Paul teaching what Jesus taught about marriage, how to live your life, morality. Um, we're going to go back into into morality again, but all that is universal. And what these other people that Paul were teaching, they were practicing the stuff outside of God. They were practicing their human lusts, and this is why Paul said you can't practice what's the flesh. You have to practice what's in the spirit. Because the flesh wants all of these. Of
Mhm.
course, um, how fun would it be? Sexual immorality, impurity, debauchery, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy. These are all human failings. These are,
Mhm.
these are our emotions that get the better of us. This is not,
Mhm.
this is not how to live if you're of the spirit. And Paul was trying to teach that. You know,
But to a certain audience, like you just described, it was a certain audience of, well, now I understand. I didn't really get that before in my first thing, but they were kind of pagans transitioning to Christians. Is that it?
right? Yes, yes. A
So
lot of
it's a
pagans,
different
right?
audience. Like
Like
again,
he was.
so my issue is how would you then interpret it if you were not a pagan transitioning to Christian, but rather, me in Montreal. So it's just how to interpret that. That's the hermeneutics part. Like just okay, that was if I was reading that letter from Paul in Corinth or whatever the city that we're talking
Well,
about.
Galatians.
If I was reading
Galatians.
that letter that just came fresh off the post from Paul, I'm interpreting it differently than if I'm reading it now with you online. You know what I mean? So it's just that's the side of the hermeneutics that I really liked. It was just all about make sure you know where it came from. Like you say, it's a letter to by with regards to this in this type of situation. And now see what that says to us today. To keep going around and just every time we talk about this, new things come out because now I'm talking to someone from Brooklyn. And so now new ideas about this same concept
Yeah.
will come out. And that's just it. It's just that, okay, now we're reading this, but what does it mean to me today is, again, I'm just interpreting it differently than you, which is beautiful. But again, we're still, I think, in agreement. There's a larger truth that we're just grasping little fragments of that is just
Oh,
truth. The only differences we have is in interpretation, I believe. So that we're not disagreeing that something back there behind the curtain is the truth, but all we can see is passages from the Bible through historical lenses and all these things. That our issue, my issue, I think,
well,
is just
Fraser.
different interpretation than yours, perhaps.
Fraser. Galatians
Mm-hmm.
5:22. I'm just going to read real quick, okay? But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness. I'll go 23. Gentleness and self-control. Self-control
Mm-hmm.
really stood out to me then right now. We are not
Mm-hmm.
animals that we are a slave to every impulse that we have. We are
Mm-hmm.
human beings with knowledge of what our acts can do could hurt ourselves or somebody else. That
Mm-hmm.
if you're going to walk by the spirit, you need that self-control in order to protect yourself and somebody else. So we know today that being promiscuous especially spreads disease. You know, get single mothers, people spreading AIDS, especially today. Who knows what kind of
Mm-hmm.
STDs they had? The same things back then too. This is
That's
now
it. Yeah.
when God gives you something to do. He said He gives you a law. It's not to say that I'm trying to punish you. It's for your own good. You have a child. You said
Yeah.
you have a 7-year-old son, right? You've told him
Yeah.
what to do, right? You've had rules for him. Have
Yeah.
you had rules for your son? Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm sure those rules you had for your son were for his own good, his own protection, right? If you
Yeah.
break those rules, did you punish him?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah,
So
I mean, like,
punishment,
in my
right?
way, I suppose. I mean, I don't
Well, no,
smite
I'm
him
not
with
gonna.
a swarm
We're
of
not.
locusts.
No, I don't want to get into that. No, I'm not gonna get into that or anything. The way you punish your kid is your business. Whatever you want to do with that's what you do.
But
But
it is different at
God
4 years
tells us,
old, 7 years old, 12
oh
years
yeah,
old,
exactly,
and it
yeah,
will
yeah.
be different. So it
But
changes. But yes,
God,
I'm
listen.
following with you. But go ahead, please. Yeah,
No, no,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So when God gives us a rule for us to follow, He's not doing it to hurt us. He's doing it to make our
Mm-hmm.
lives better. Promiscuity is not
Mm-hmm.
what our bodies are meant to do. Promiscuity is good for chimpanzees because they have a much stronger immune system. They don't spread diseases like can the human body. Um,
Sure.
we can have kids very easily. We have single parents. We know they don't work. They struggle. Single parents have a very hard time raising children. You need two
Mm-hmm.
parents to raise a child. I'm not saying that single parent thing is bad or anything. I know you are too. Don't get me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
There are circumstances to
No,
everybody's
no,
life,
I've got good
but you
support.
start out with a certain
Yeah.
okay. So you start out with a certain set of rules that God gives you to live under, and He's doing it for your own good. You know, um,
Mm-hmm.
we know by studies today that especially homosexuals are 40% more likely to commit suicide, have 60% more likely to contract the disease. They suffer from depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. This is
Because we
not a
keep
good
yelling at
lifestyle
them.
to pursue. Huh?
Because we keep yelling at them. You're dumb. You're
No, it's
dumb.
not.
Stop it.
No, Fraser,
Well,
this
that
is
would make you
this
depressed, wouldn't you? If
society.
every day someone
This
yells stuff at you in
society
the
is the
street.
most welcoming society of homosexuals I've seen in my entire lifetime.
We just
We
spend 20 minutes talking about how homosexuals is not a good thing.
It's not a
I
good
mean,
thing, and I
it's
just gave you all the things to be. But
so if you're walking around in society and people says what you're doing is not a good thing, you're not good. I mean, you're going to be more suicidal. That's a natural thing. I'm just saying. Anyways, let's get off the
no,
homosexual things.
no, I
But
understand.
I
But
agree with
even,
you.
but Fraser,
Sexual,
even today, that homosexuality is accepted throughout society today. They're still having
Mhm.
the exact same problems they had when they were forced to hide their sexuality. So is it because
Totally
that
different. Totally different. Totally,
no, it's
totally
not
different. Let's get
totally.
off that
It's
subject.
not
But it's
different. All
totally
right.
different problems now. Oh my goodness, no. But I mean, you got politicians and stuff. You got like, I mean, there's just, it's a different level of acceptance altogether. I don't, anyways, whatever. Let's get off the homosexual thing. It's a non-starter perhaps. But no, but back to that, like, I agree with you that there's these rules that are laid out, like you say, for a child. And again, if I was, we're just saying a really, really like a society-sized child, so when it's young, we'll say at the age or at the year zero or at the year minus 3,000, say, or what's the 2,500 BC, 2,300 or whatever, then, we lay down some rules because, again, these are pagans that just haven't got anything together, right? And so you lay down these rules. But now that the kid society gets older and older, again, okay, here's a new rule book, if you will. Again, when my kid gets to 12, now he can go and take the bus himself, right? There's certain liberties that I give him because I see that, oh, okay, now you're not 95% pagan, which a kid really is. They're just savages.
Yeah.
They're just,
Yeah.
I don't even know, they're animals. Like there's nothing closer. They're just like, they'll eat off the ground. They don't matter. Like they'll be messing with all their mess and stuff. Oh, they're like just, they're not even, anyway, no, I'm just joking. But, they
No, I
need a
know.
different set of rules. You see what I mean? So just carrying
No,
forward the
but
analogy that in my mind, again, it's just context dependent. You look at that society, if you will, and you say, okay, we'll let them have a little bit more leeway. Let's just see if they know what love really means, what commitment really means. And again, like, oh no, anyways, that's,
as
again, we're
far as
just talking
marriage is
about,
concerned,
just,
Fraser,
that's
as
it.
far as marriage is concerned, it's never changed in the Bible. It's always meant the same thing. It's
But
our
no, it
human.
doesn't, no, I
We've
disagree.
changed it.
We've changed it, but to an acceptable way of all religious people. So it's no longer that the woman has to be subservient to the man, which for thousands of years it was interpreted by every priest that this is how things are. Whereas now it's sort of, no, okay, there's more equality amongst the sexes within a
Oh, we're not
marriage.
talking about
And that's just,
subserviency. We're just talking about a relationship between a man and a woman inside a marriage, not
well, that
subserviency.
relationship was far different 1,000 years ago. Like a Catholic woman 1,000 years ago would not have the same experience
And
as a
well,
Catholic
yeah, and
woman now.
you are talking about Arab culture where women were basically second class to men. You are, and it
There
was
you go.
followed
So
the
I'm
same thing
talking
in.
about marriage is different now, even within the church, even if we don't even have to talk about the heathens, as it were. Even within the church, what's acceptable as marriage today would look like heathens to those people back then, right? We would, I mean, not we, I mean,
I think
good
no,
Catholics,
Fraser, I think
good practicing Catholics now would
also,
look like
I think
heathens
no,
to
I
those
think
people back then.
the core definition or the core marriage that we have today, it's probably about the same. I say 90% the same. Whether our
Yeah,
sexual whether
yeah.
our gender or sexual what I'm trying to get the word now, our duties within the marriage have
No,
changed.
laws,
Okay, no,
laws,
that's changed. Equality, right? You're right about the equality thing. Men have or
yeah,
women have come up to the equality of men too, and that's not a whole topic
yeah.
altogether. But the basic core of marriage from 3,000 years ago today is 90. I think mostly the same.
Yeah. No, and it does, but imagine like 500 years ago, 200 years ago,
Gender roles,
50 years ago,
50,
uh,
yeah.
it being appropriate for Christians, and now I have to go outside of Catholic for this one, but it'd be appropriate for Christians to have a woman sanctify a marriage.
No, it's still no. Even in Catholic Church, no. Outside the Catholic
I
Church,
know,
yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
very,
That's why I had
yeah,
to go outside for other Christians. You know
right.
what I
You know
mean?
you do,
But you know what
right?
I mean, right? There may
Yeah,
be,
no,
and
I
maybe
know
Catholics
exactly
still
what you
see
mean.
it like anyone married by a woman, or
Well,
something like
Fraser,
this. You know what I mean?
Episcopalians recognize gay marriage under God. That's what part of the Bible recognizes gay marriage? None of it.
It's just the
So is that?
evolution.
But is
But
that? But
no, no.
but
Yeah, go ahead.
is that a marriage? Is that a biblical definition of marriage? The Episcopalians recognize homosexual marriage.
No, we stopped.
That's not what a
We
biblical marriage
stopped going
is.
to the homosexual thing. I'm just talking about a
No, I
straight
understand.
marriage sanctified by a
Okay.
woman. No, I'm trying to stay away from the homosexual thing because it's. I think
All
we've
right.
done that
All right.
one.
We'll stay
But
away from
anyway, well,
that.
we can
All
come
right. We'll
back to
stay
it
away
later.
from that.
But just try. No, we can come back to it. I don't want it to be a non-starter that we get stuck only on that. But
Yeah,
just
I know.
again,
I tend,
like
yeah, I tend to think,
a straight marriage. Yeah, no, that's fine. And for me, it's like, it's 2 to 5% of the population. So whatever it is, it's not the so yeah, anyway. So whatever, let's drop it, or we can come
sure.
back to it. I don't mean to shuffle it off, but just because for the point that I want to make there was just that okay, a heterosexual marriage and a I don't know which. Anyway, so I can't remember which denominations have women pastors, as it were, or
It's,
women
yeah, no,
that
Baptist,
again.
Episcopalian, Protestant, I don't know,
It's just
Lutheran, I don't know.
exactly. So not having to evolve all the way, the church or to any other extreme, the church has come to that point. At least again, those denominations in the Protestant have come to that point to say, all good or good again, good Christians under those denominations approve that women can now sanctify marriages. Seem to be okay with that. There's I'm sure passages that strongly deny that, but it's come to that point so that again, for me. I think that God is okay with that. Like with time, we're now teenagers. Okay, like it's a dumb thing to say, well, we can let women out of the house. So again, God's okay
Well,
with that.
you
God's
went
okay with that, I
1940s.
think. Right? I think
Well,
God's okay with letting the women out of the house, even though in the Bible you could find a lot of stuff that says that. Oh, one of those things about the Bible, you're not allowed to be around your wife when she's on her period. It's like,
yeah,
what? That
something
one
like
doesn't
that.
fly today at all. Right? It's
No,
just some weird things like that. It's just like you say, rules for a kid kind of thing. That it's like, okay, or oh no, the better one, right, that came to me. The STDs in the ancient world, like you said. It was like
right.
we didn't have any science. We didn't have anything. So it was just like, guys, just stop messing around because we're spreading some nasty stuff. Just couple up
Right, they
and like
didn't
that,
have,
there's just
yeah,
no
right.
transmission, right? So it was
But
really
back then they
good
wouldn't even know anything
healthcare
about that.
policies.
Well,
No, but it's
no,
just
but
intuitive good healthcare policy, right?
well, what's funny
Monogamy,
you
if
mentioned
you
about the
started
menstruation, though,
virgin and
Fraser.
stayed with this, yeah.
Funny
Sorry,
you
go
went
ahead.
about the menstruation thing. They didn't have the sanitation or the cleanliness they have today. So staying away from a woman who's
Exactly.
menstruating could be just like it's one of the cleanliness rules. They couldn't go near a dead
Exactly.
body. They couldn't handle
That's it.
some types of meat because they
Mm-hmm.
didn't know. See, they didn't know about the transmission of
Amen.
diseases, but God did. So God gave us those
There it
rules,
is.
gave them those rules. Do this, do that, do the other thing, and you keep yourself clean.
Exactly. And again, I like that analogy of the kid growing up because it's like, okay, now, and again, just as I said, kids are messy. They will seriously like wipe their butt with their hand. It's just like,
Oh
what are
yeah, I
you
know.
doing? That's just so nasty, right? And that's the sort of thing that you said. At one point, we didn't have the maxi pads. And so it
Yeah,
was a
right.
messy experience. And so it's the same thing as a kid. And then we get maxi pads. So it's like, okay, the girls can hang around all month long now. It's just because we've matured as a society in the sense that we've been given, if you would, maxi pads is a crude way of saying it, so that
Yeah.
kind of new rules apply, or at least a new interpretation applies to what is cleanly, what is like what would help save us. Because as you say, back then it's like follow these rules, or else like seriously, we're going to spread disease. And as you said, there was this sort of message that says follow these rules or you spread disease. But now we've come to the point where we understand the diseases, so we can help control them in other ways. Again, maxi pads. So,
Because it wasn't until 1930 that surgeons didn't wash their hands before surgery, and people got disease. They didn't know that
didn't
washing
know.
their hands prevented. And the guy who said wash your hands before surgery was put in a mental institution. Meanwhile, he was correct.
Is that right? And
I'm
that
just
did
using that as an
something else.
example of like
Yeah,
I'm just using an example of
how it
evolving.
had to evolve, right?
Yeah,
Hmm.
right.
And I think that there's other rules too. They said, I remember them saying that, it was like forbidden to do like autopsies. Not forbidden, but it was really weird back in the day, like
Yeah.
in early, like medieval times. It's just super weird. Someone's going around doing autopsies to the point that you'd probably be like, I don't know, if it's like to be killed or whatever. It's just super. You don't do it, right? But then we come along with medical science where, they cut people up all the time and see the value of it. So it was like maybe at that time, when we were coming from these pagan eras, you didn't want people like going chopping other people up. That's just, nah, no, you shouldn't do that. Whereas nowadays, going and doing surgeries, replacing things kind of weird, but I mean, hey, it's just one of those gifts that we've been given as a teenager, as it were, to be
That's a
able
sure.
to,
Yeah.
again, that's kind of my interpretation. It's very loose, but I'm liking the analogy kind of thing there.
It's well, you want certain aspects of our civilization have evolved. You're right about that. But
Hmm.
there are certain aspects that haven't. Marriage being one of them that has
Hmm.
not evolved. It's the same thing since the Bible first came out, since God first created Adam and Eve, and it's the same today. Any redefinition of it
Well,
is not marriage. That's
no, but again, just what is sexual roles? That for me, the definition of marriage within even the
well, you're talking about
religious
gender.
definition
No, okay,
is
gender
about
roles within the
sexual
marriage
roles,
have
or gender
evolved.
roles. I
No,
mean,
Fraser. Okay, you're talking about
that's
gender
it.
roles within the marriage. Okay, those have evolved. No, that's fine. That
That's
you're
it.
free to evolve
Okay.
that. No, you're free to evolve those.
Yeah.
But the
Okay.
marriage in itself has not been redefined. Gender roles have maybe, not the marriage.
Okay. Well, then, what is the marriage then? Like, what is marriage?
A union
What's the
between a
part that
man and a
didn't get
woman.
redefined? Okay, what's the
A
definition of
union
a
between a
union?
man and a woman, sanctified under God to create a family, have children. It's basically, a marriage is so we can
Okay,
continue the human race. Without marriage,
that's it.
all right, we can screw everything that incite have kids outside of marriage, or men can. I've seen you. What I'm sure you've watched Maury Povich. Are you the father? You are not the father. Have you seen that show?
Oh, these guys. Also, I get where you're going. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I see what you're
right.
saying.
So yeah, how
Like
many
Jerry
guys?
Springer or something
How
like
many
that.
women are these
Yeah,
guys having sex with to have kids with? Guys having 10,
yeah,
20,
yeah,
30 kids with different women. What kind of stable life is
yeah.
that?
Yeah, no,
It's
I agree. I agree.
it,
It's not a good. Yeah, no, that's fine. But then it doesn't have to be. Again, in that, like, if we stopped the sentence right or the government, we would be in perfect agreement, I think. And then I would say,
no, we are in
but
agreement,
I
but
don't want to go
where
to
the government
church.
got involved is
You
where
know?
where we disagree with what the government's doing. That's what we disagree
No,
with,
I
what the
know
government
right to
is
church too.
imposing.
I don't like the yeah, yeah. I don't like the new. Well, again, marriage for me is what the current definition looks like in the dictionary, which includes the state there. So that's where I get to with just the definition part of it. But up to the last part, it was just like again the involvement of the priest in that sanctification. So everything you said, I'm in agreement with, except for kind of like how to sanctify that
All
union.
right, so
Like that
Fraser, wait,
one
wait,
part,
taking,
that's the
I,
one part,
Fraser,
and then I
Fraser,
believe that you can sanctify in other ways. But I think we're
Fraser,
clear on that now. That there is some difference in
Fraser,
opinion. Yeah.
Fraser. Let's take the priest out. Let's take the church out. Let's take who can perform a marriage out of that. Okay, then just focus on
God.
what the marriage actually is. All right, can we
Yeah.
can we
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
with
Yeah. Yeah.
that? Okay, because
Sure. Sure.
it
Yeah.
seems I know because we both would I don't know if we're going to agree or disagree on that, but who can perform a marriage? What's sanctified under God? Who can you know?
Mm.
It's getting complicated in that aspect.
Yeah.
So let's stick to a
Yeah.
more simple definition.
Yeah. I like just going back to where we started, like where you started on the, maybe it just goes, I should pull it up again, the Galatians one.
Galatians
And just
Galatians
that,
5:13.
where was it?
Galatians 5.
Galatians 5, yeah. And just that description of, drunken orgies. I don't know. I should stop saying that. But
Sounds like fun, doesn't
you know
it?
what I mean? Oh,
Get a
well,
little
no, but
fun.
I'm just saying that when we talk about what is a union, just that here's the bad union and here's the good union column. I'll try and pull that up again
Okay.
right here. You know what I mean? And that
Yeah,
just to
no, I
decide
know
on that
exactly
rather
what you
than,
mean.
as you say,
No,
yeah, yeah. So to go
no, no,
back to what we agree on is a good union at least.
no,
Where
I
are we at?
understand your problems with who can perform a marriage. That's not our problem. That's not what we're trying to discuss. We're trying to discuss what
Yeah,
is a marriage. And that
that's right.
regardless of
I
what the
like it.
state
Yeah,
says what it is, regardless of what the state says
yeah,
it is, the biblical definition of a marriage is separate from what any state says it's going to. Being legal doesn't mean it's right. It,
amen.
it was legal. It was legal in Germany in 1930s and 40s to kill Jews. Was it right? Obviously not.
Obviously, yeah.
So
That's I agree with
legality,
you.
without
Yes, that's
right. So we're
exactly.
not going to talk about legalities.
So I think that's where again, that's great because I think there we found some agreement on it, even coming from the earlier conversation.
Oh
It's just
yeah.
like again, institutions can definitely take things and try and redefine them. So and it comes in with these legalities. It's like okay, well the state is doing something. They call this that. I don't want to call it that, but again, so it doesn't even bother. It's just like states will do what they will do, and people will go in there and make it things anyhow. So I agree. So coming back to like again more basic principles that are important, as it were, how to be loving
Yeah. Right.
in a marriage.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. We're going into tangents that what if, and what if usually doesn't
right.
happen. You know.
It's more like,
So yeah.
yeah, exactly. How should I be with my next wife or with my, oh, how should I be with my wife
Right.
when I find her? The next wife. No, I plan on, there should be only one. There should be, and I fully believe that. Like, it's just like, and to base it on, again, I don't think we find any disagreement. So I'm talking right now about 19 through 21 as kind of the bad column.
Yes. Right.
And I think the rest, 22 to 26, is the good column.
Uh. Yeah.
I think, no, since we
Yeah.
live in the
22.
spirit, which
Right.
the
No, you
spirit
got
does
it. You
not
got it.
become
I'm
conceived,
having part of
provoking,
it
and
right now.
envying of each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, 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 I think. It's just sort of like do this, don't do that. Well, there's a little bit of don't do that at the end of 26 too. But basically it's that. It's sort of a vague definition of kind of like how to behave with your partner, as it were. or
Well,
with your
well,
union
26 says, "Let
buddy.
us not become
Union-
conceited, provoking, and envying each other." Conceit, provocation,
Yeah,
and envy are not good things.
no, you would,
That falls
yeah.
under the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods.
Oh yeah, that's really, I've lived through that before with
Yeah,
people that were obviously not my wife because we didn't have that relationship, but it was that provoking and it poisoned everything, And for sure, you just can't have that. It just, you don't want to find the person's weak spots and press that button. You find the person's weak
right,
spots
right.
and protect that part, right? That's the loving part. So, and it came to that, it's like, well, you know exactly how to push my buttons. Why would you push my buttons? And I was probably guilty of the
Some
same thing.
people
So it's
enjoy
really to
that.
follow that. It
Some
is,
people enjoy
and I
pushing other
really,
people's buttons. It's terrible. Humans treat
and
each
it,
other so bad sometimes. It's
oh,
horrible.
yeah, I
I
agree.
mean, inside a marriage where you're supposed to love each other almost unconditionally,
Yeah,
especially some people want to raise a family. Having that toxic relationship when you're provoking each other is it's not a way to live. You're supposed to
yeah,
love yourself as Jesus loved the church, as Jesus loved you. Um,
yeah, and
and
I
that kind
agree.
of provocation and envy is not love. It's just it's not good. Not good. It's very toxic, like you said.
No, I agree, and I would extend it out. But anyways, no, no, but I like this rest of it. So that's the provocation part. But the first part of that, the 22 right, through 23, I guess. Yeah, 22 and 23. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance. I don't really know what that is.
I have
Faith,
no idea
or no,
either.
sorry, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness. I know what all those ones are though, and self-control. Just a list of just good things and forbearance, which is probably a good thing too. And then after that, it says, against such things, there is no law. And it's just that. It's just like if you're living, and I don't even think you have to put that in a marriage. That's just good stuff in there all around, right? For general kind of life. Against such thing, there can be no law. So that, at least for me, I don't know, so I'm going very global now. As long as people are living like that, there should be no law against that. That kind of living, joy,
Right.
peace, love, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Again, towards a wife, that's what we're talking about. Which again, that for me is that's a great marriage. That 22 and 23. 26, we're in agreement. Since we live in the Spirit, 25, I'm good with. I'm just going to 24 because it's the one that says Jesus or Christ Jesus. Christ Jesus?
All right. Just-
Or
Right.
Jesus Christ. It must say Jesus Christ. Um,
Now he always when Paul usually writes Christ
so,
Jesus.
oh, he did. Okay, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires.
Well, Paul is saying there that we
That one
we
I'm going to get.
crucify Jesus every time we uh, serve our flesh. When we do what is contrary.
Oh,
Yeah. So right, exactly. So when we start, with all the
hmm.
evil stuff that when we go to the desires of the flesh, we crucify Jesus every time. Very heavy.
So
I
yeah,
mean,
okay, knowing that then, yeah, no, it's pretty heavy. That's a bit heavy, gotta admit. But you know that it's kind of like, well, we got to procreate though. We got to get this human race on. So at least if we're going to get this human race continuing, we're going to do it in a respectful manner. So we're going to get all carnal, we're going to get kinky, but we're going to do it
well,
respectfully and lovingly,
yeah,
right?
right. In a
Kind of,
loving monogamous relationship, not in anything else.
yeah.
Of course, God knows we're going to have
Um,
desires of the flesh. He knows that, and it's
exactly.
sanctified
That's where
within a marriage. It's sanctified within a
that's
marriage.
where
Anything
Paul gets
outside of
into.
that is not sanctified. It's a sin.
And it is a sin, but I think that Paul doesn't let you off the hook, but at least says, okay, you're gonna crucify the flesh, or as it were, but wait. So it's then okay. So perhaps mutual. Oh darn! It was talking about a husband and wife, or he's talking about a husband and wife. We're talking about, sorry, Corinthians 7. I'm right about 5. 5. Do not de- yeah, do not deprive, do not, yeah, sorry, I'll start over again. Do not deprive each other Oh no, sorry, I don't. I skip over that. It's talking about mutual consent, but I don't really get that. But that's not what I meant to say. What it says in the next part, about midway through 5, then come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. So it's like, don't, it's going to be that sort of like crucifying the flesh thing, but just don't do it once so that it doesn't build up and then Satan can get a hold of you, basically. Because knowing that kind of releasing that once is better than not blue
Well, no.
balling it, but and they're talking about that's talking about a married woman and man, but then it goes on with again what I said before about the unmarried 8 and 9 there, the unmarried that it's just like okay, do it, but just because and he says or it says here I should see which version I'm on. Oh, New
Wait.
International, yeah.
Fraser, tell me
And
what
it
you're
says
reading. Fraser, tell me what you're reading.
Corinthians 7,
Which one? One
Corinthians 7.
Corinthians? 1 Corinthians or 2 Corinthians?
1 Corinthians 7. Sorry, yeah. I got to
1
get it all together.
Corinthians
Right.
7.
Yeah.
Okay, let me see.
Sorry.
I
So
want
I
to see
was
what you're reading. I want to make sure.
yeah.
Married
I'll
woman.
give you I started. What should we do? It goes right along back. It starts. It even says sexual relations in my version,
Oh, I see that. Yeah.
but I don't know if you have to start there. It is. Uh, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with women, but okay. Yeah, I think it starts good. Like even one all the way
It's no.
through
Okay. What? Okay.
verse
I think you've
11.
misinterpreted it. See. Says it's good for a
But I
man
really
not
get into
to have sexual
it.
relations. Wait. It is good for a man not to have sexual relations with the woman. But since sexual immorality is occurring, each man should have sexual relationships with his own wife, and each one with their own husband. So Paul again is saying, if you're gonna have sex, do it inside a marriage. Don't do it outside. And if it's good, it's better
But
not
it
to
is
have
this,
sex
each
if
time
you
you do
control
it, yeah.
yourself. He's not giving
But
you
it
a
comes back
pass
to
to
what
have
you
sex
said
outside
too.
of marriage and then get married again.
Yeah.
There's no passes
No,
here.
no, no, that's not what I'm saying. No, that, oh, darn, my battery.
What's my bad?
No, oh, shoot, why do you say that then? I got it plugged in. I think we're okay now.
What
Um,
happened?
no, it just goes back to what you were saying, or no, what the other one said about the sacrificing the flesh. So just that first part is not about sex outside the marriage, but just that each time you do have sex inside the marriage, you know, Jesus Christ, it's him that kind of relieves you of that. It's a sin, not a sin. It's carnal urges, but
Inside of marriage, it's
Jesus
not a
Christ
sin.
is
Outside the
sacrifice.
marriage, it's a sin. And then outside the marriage
Uh,
is when Paul says you re-crucify Christ every time you do that.
I'm not talking about inside outside the marriage. I'm trying to get back to just what we were saying about. Ah, darn, I missed the last one. Okay, I'm going to go back to it because the other one said about uh, crucified. Yeah, those who belong to Christ have crucified the flesh with its passion and desires. So that while even within a loving marriage, it seems like you're crucifying flesh with your passion and desires. Is that it?
No, no. What
Oh,
Paul
okay.
is
Okay, that's
saying
what I'm.
is what Paul is saying is, if
That's it. Okay.
it's better to be married than to pursue your passions outside of a marriage. What does it say here?
No,
To the
okay,
married
okay.
I
Sorry,
give
sorry,
this
sorry.
command. Wait,
But yeah, I was
well, it
trying to
says,
give that as an
I
example.
just
Maybe
had
that.
it now.
Yeah,
Okay, now it
maybe
says
not.
1 Corinthians 7:8. Now to the unmarried and the widows I say, it is good for them to stay unmarried as I do. But if they cannot control themselves, they should marry. For it is better to marry than to burn with passion. So
Yeah.
basically, what Paul is
Okay.
saying here is, if you can't control yourself, get married, so your passions are done within the law of a marriage under God. That's how you control
But
yourself.
but doesn't it, but this comes around to like again that unmarried or widows shouldn't get married in the old rules. So now it's like okay, widows, you weren't supposed to get married before, but now you can go ahead and get married, just not to
No,
fall into
a
the
widow
devil's
can
trap. So that
remarry.
was one of those things that I meant by a new rule. No.
A widow can remarry. Never say anything about widows not being able to remarry. It's when you get divorced you can't remarry. He goes on to say that. Let's see. To the married I give this command. 1 Corinthians 7, chapter 10. Oh, sorry. 1 Corinthians 7, verse 10. We'll start in verse 10. To the married I give this command, not I, but the Lord. A wife must not separate from her husband, But if she does, she must remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband, and a husband must not divorce his wife. Uh, the laws of divorce given to Moses were Moses' laws, not God's. So divorce is not sanctioned by God. The person should be married to their spouse for the rest of their lives. Um,
Hmm.
if you divorce your wife, you're supposed to remarry her again. You're not supposed to remarry somebody else, or else you're committing adultery. This is part of the Bible. I'm not making this up. I don't know exactly where I read it, but I did read that. Um,
But what is
okay,
the Catholic divorce called? What is it called? The Catholic divorce
annulment,
is a different name, right?
an annulment.
Annulment,
But that's
which is
okay.
allowed.
Annulment, it's allowed, but annulment is like the marriage never existed because either there was cheating, unfaithfulness that was never consummated.
That's it.
Okay, or sexual or spousal abuse. That's
That's
not that
okay.
I say
Yeah,
I believe it,
I'm
but
fine with that. Yep.
I'm
Oh, you
fine with
don't
that
believe in
too.
annulment?
No, I
Oh, you're
believe in
fine with
annulment.
annulment. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
No, yeah.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Me too. Fine, I'll call it annulment. Like I won't because again, if it comes to that, what you were talking about, then in my mind, again, I don't need a priest in there or a lawyer to tell me that that's not a sanctified by God kind of marriage. That was
Right.
one that was no. That one wasn't supposed to happen. Never was. That's not what we call a marriage. Our definition of marriage goes back to what we talked about earlier. So I agree. Annulment. I should not that I should call it annulment, but I think we have a strong agreement on that point. Just as you said it, maybe we have
Oh
to get
yeah,
more
yeah.
into it. But I think that the idea of that no. If you're doing that abusive thing or cheating thing, it wasn't that kind of committed marriage. It wasn't committed. It wasn't a marriage, right? So
Right.
it didn't exist. I agree with how you stated
Exactly
that. I
right.
liked it. Or no, I don't like it. I don't like annulment or divorce or anything.
No,
But I
but no,
mean,
you like the definition. You like the idea of what the annulment is.
yes. Yeah, divorce is sort of like it's again, divorce is this legal contract in my mind. It's just like bring the lawyers in and do a
Oh yeah,
divorce,
every
right?
time
So
I
it's
think of
not
divorce, I think
it's
lawyers, court, the custody battles. That's what I think of.
the institution. That's the
Yeah,
institution. That's
yeah.
the
Right, right.
there was someone said to me one time when you go into the even if you go into the church, or maybe I even wrote that too, but you go into the church and you sign the little thing at the front of the thing, people are looking at you and you cheer. You've actually signed some like 1,300 pages of legal documentation, financial agreements, and all this other stuff with that. And it's like, wait. Are we doing this in a church? We brought in 1,300 pages of legal documentation and financial agreements. Then again, when you get divorced, you have to go through all those 1,300 pages and separate the things out. Yeah, sorry. Woo, back on the thing. State or like that institution, the institution of divorce. Like again, that's part of that legalese, right? So yeah, annulment. I like annulment as a concept in the more spiritual sense, really.
Right, yeah, and yeah. Okay.
Or more spiritual,
All right,
more yeah. The more spiritual sets a definition of marriage, maybe. Yeah.
all right.
Do you hear me? Did that cut out?
Yeah, I can
No.
hear you. No, I can hear you. I just wanted to check
Okay, good.
my
Yeah.
battery. All right.
Okay.
I think
Sure.
I
Well,
think that's enough for tonight, Fraser. We've been talking for a very
so
long
yeah,
time.
it's good that you cut it off. I'm like, should I cut this off? Should we just? And then it just kept going and going. I'm
No,
like,
I
okay,
think we
what's
fit the
going?
crescendo. We fit
What
our
is it?
crescendo,
How long?
Fraser. We're good.
It's good. My wife, I'm glad the Wi-Fi didn't kick out again. That was frustrating. I'm like, no, are
Okay.
you seriously serious? Anyways, it seemed like I rebooted the router and that did the trick for the most part. So I'm gonna try and do what Sean suggested and get like a wired connection to the internet, but I
Yeah,
didn't,
that might
not yet. Anyways,
stabilize
so
it a lot. Yeah,
yeah.
that'll
Anyways,
stabilize
we'll
it.
keep
Yeah.
working on it. But I'm gonna look back on this one. It was a little bit. I look at the time now. I'm like, whoops, that was long. But I'll try and watch the thing back. I think
Yeah.
it felt interesting. I don't know if I'll see it all again, but yeah. So
Yeah. I'm sorry. I don't
thanks.
usually get
So
my thoughts. I can't usually word my thoughts too well sometimes, so I tend to stumble. But yeah, I think I got my point across.
I think so. Like I think like especially there was some tough points there that oh this is gonna be rough. But then you threw out a couple quotes. I'm like, whoa, that really like you held it up. Like or you it was a reasonable thing. I don't follow the same interpretation. But I'm like, oh well, if he interpreted it like that, that's a very reasonable thing. I can't argue with that. I could just say, well, I've interpreted it differently. But again, and from my point of view, it's more as a you're a practicing Catholic, obviously, and I'm not. So
Yeah.
I don't want to
Right.
sort of tell you, no, this should be the interpretation. It's just sort of like, okay, I've taken these pieces that I like and found agreement so
Yeah.
that, rather, so I hope that my intention comes across as like, I'm not trying
Oh,
to preach
absolutely.
how you should
No.
interpret your Bible. It's like, no, no, I'm just trying to understand your Bible better and find
It's
these
your
these
Bible too.
agreements.
The Bible's written for everybody.
I mean that it's more in the well anyway I know I hope it comes
All
across as
right,
I'm not
Fraser.
trying to
Let's cut it.
convert anything.
All right, we're good. All
You'll
right,
find
this is
some
the
truth
Seeking
in it.
Truth.
So,
All right, sorry. All right, this is the
go ahead.
Seeking Truth. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.